The peace I found in the mountains of Colorado evaporated the moment I turned the corner onto Maple Street. Where my art therapy studio used to be, there was nothing but rubble. Centuries-old bricks turned to dust. Colorful windows shattered into 1,000 pieces, and my supplies, watercolors, brushes, clay, buried under all the wreckage. I dropped my bags right in the middle of the sidewalk. A knot formed in my throat as I walked among the remains of the place that had saved me after 3 tours in Afghanistan. The space that once helped other veterans find their voice through art was just gone. Mr. Thompson? Michael Thompson? A woman in a sharp blazer and high heels came over, carefully stepping through the debris with a clipboard in her hand. I'm Susan Miller, president of the Homeowners Association. We've tried reaching you several times. I was isolated for 3 weeks. Meditating. Therapy. I could barely string a sentence together. What happened to my studio? She smiled, though her smile didn't reach her eyes. This property was declared in violation of Section 375B of our association's code. Since you didn't respond to the notices, we went ahead with the demolition order. Demolition order? This property doesn't even belong to your jurisdiction. Actually, it does. There was a recent expansion of the HOA's boundaries. Everything's perfectly legal. Her tone was cold, rehearsed. I suggest you get a lawyer if you have any questions. My hands started shaking. I took a deep breath, trying to push away the darkness that threatened to swallow me. Ever since I got back from the war, I learned how to control moments like these. You didn't have the right. There was art in there, stories, lives. There were structural irregularities, Mr. Thompson. It posed a danger to the community. She checked her watch. I have a meeting now. My secretary can send you the documents if you'd like. A police cruiser pulled up near us. Officer James Anderson, who I knew from community meetings, walked over. Everything okay here? He looked from the rubble to my face, recognition in his eyes. Mike, is this your place? It was, I replied. James turned to Susan. Miss Miller, I thought we agreed to notify the department before any demolition. We sent all the necessary documents, officer. Everything's in order. While they were talking, something caught my eye among the debris. A piece of blue ceramic, part of a vase that Billy, a Navy veteran, had made during his first session. I slipped the fragment into my pocket. I'm going to look into this, I said, my voice getting firmer. It's not going to stay like this. The next morning, I went to the public library. I spent hours digging through records about the HOA, its boundaries, and its rules. The official documents didn't mention any recent expansion of jurisdiction. Something was off. Margaret Wilson, a local artist in her 50s that I'd met at art fairs, found me at the library. I heard about your studio. The same almost happened to me last year, she said, sitting down next to me. They tried to force me to sell by claiming violations that never even existed. How did you fight back? I hired a lawyer, but I ended up giving in a little. I paid this outrageous fine and then remodeled it according to their specifications. She sighed. A lot of artists ended up giving up, and the ones who stayed are constantly under threat. As we talked, I realized this wasn't a one-off incident. There was a pattern. The HOA seemed to target cultural and artistic spaces on purpose. I need to speak to others who've been affected, I decided. Margaret introduced me to Robert Williams, a photographer who had to shut down his studio after months of bureaucratic harassment from the HOA. They want to turn this neighborhood into something gentrified, Robert explained. I'm sure there are already plans for a luxury condo where your studio once was. He was right. I found records of a meeting between the HOA and the Vista Horizon developer. Plans for a high-end complex exactly where my studio and the neighboring properties used to be. The approval dates were even before the supposed violations. This wasn't a coincidence. I needed legal help. David Reynolds, a lawyer known for taking on community causes, agreed to see me. This isn't just about your studio, Michael, David said after reviewing my documents. It's about abuse of power and possibly even fraud. They destroyed more than just a building. They destroyed a sanctuary. I'll help you pro bono, David decided. But we need to build a solid case. We need more evidence and more witnesses. I left his office with a plan. The HOA had made a mistake by demolishing my studio. They thought they were dealing with a traumatized veteran who would simply take the loss. But I learned in the war that some battles have to be fought, and this one was just beginning. With David's support, we set up an improvised headquarters in his office. Maps of the neighborhood covered the walls, with markings on every property hit by the HOA in the last 3 years. The pattern was undeniable, a clear path of cleaning out to make way for the Vista Horizon project. "We need more people willing to testify," David said, adjusting his glasses as he looked over the spread-out documents. I organized a meeting at the local cafe, with some help from Margaret and Robert. On the night we set, we thought maybe 10 people would come. More than 30 showed up. My antique shop was threatened with being labeled structurally dangerous. I got hit with a $5,000 fine for a mural on the side wall. I had to shut down my gallery after 3 surprise inspections in a week. The stories piled up. Each one followed the same script: growing bureaucratic harassment until the person quits or is forced to leave. Weeks later, there would be a demolition or a forced remodel to meet the new community standards. A young woman at the back raised her hand hesitantly. Jennifer Parker, 29, with her brown hair tied up in a simple bun, said, "I work for the HOA administration," her voice barely above a whisper. A hush fell over the cafe. "I've seen documents. Altered. Dates changed. Duplicate signatures." She looked me straight in the eye. "Your case was the worst. The demolition was authorized without even half the required legal procedures." "Why are you telling us this?" I asked. "Because I joined that administration to help the community. What they're doing isn't right." Jennifer became our inside informant, handing over copies of emails and documents that proved the connection between Susan Miller, the HOA, and Vista Horizon. We discovered that Susan was even receiving a commission for each property cleared for the new project. As our investigation moved forward, I started facing resistance. Flat tires, threatening messages. One morning I even found an envelope on my car's windshield with photos of me leaving David's office, the cafe where we met, and even my parents' house in another state. Officer Anderson helped me file the threat reports. "This just shows you're getting too close, Mike," he said. "I've already asked for extra patrols in the area." David kicked off the legal process, a class action lawsuit representing everyone affected by the HOA. We requested a temporary injunction to stop any further demolitions while the case was pending. 2 weeks later, at a preliminary hearing, I faced Susan Miller for the first time since that day at my studio's rubble. She was flanked by 3 corporate lawyers in expensive suits. "The Homeowners Association is simply doing its job by upholding community standards," argued the lead lawyer. "Mr. Thompson and the other plaintiffs are resisting the natural progress of the neighborhood." "Natural progress?" David fired back. "The documents we presented show a systematic plan to remove artists and small local businesses to make way for a luxury development." The judge reviewed the documents gravely. "There is enough evidence to warrant a deeper investigation. I grant a temporary injunction." It was a small victory, but it gave our community hope. That night, I got an unexpected call. "Mr. Thompson, this is Raymond Phillips from Phillips Media Group. One of the city's biggest newspapers wanted to cover our story. Within a week, the front page was all about it. War veteran leads fight against forced gentrification." The public pressure built up. Residents from other neighborhoods began showing up at our meetings, reporting similar tactics. The case grew beyond our own block, becoming a symbol in the battle against predatory real estate speculation. Susan Miller tried fighting back with the media, portraying herself as a modernizer battling a group that was stuck in the past. But the public was on our side. Jennifer, our informant, paid a high price for her honesty. She got fired for breaching confidentiality. We helped her get a temporary job while the case moved forward. "I don't regret it," she said when I visited her. "My dad was in the military. He taught me about honor." "Thank you," I replied, handing her a small sculpture I had recovered from the studio rubble. "This means more than you can imagine." The trial was set for 3 months out. David worked tirelessly, preparing our testimonies and gathering evidence. "We have to be ready for aggressive tactics," he warned. "They have a lot of money riding on this." He was right. 1 week before the trial, I got a settlement offer. $150,000 to drop the lawsuit and sign a confidentiality agreement. "It's a pretty big sum," David admitted as we talked it over. "It could rebuild your studio somewhere else." I looked down at the blue ceramic fragment from Billy that I'd carried like a lucky charm since day one. "It's not about the money. It's about what they took from all of us. About what they planned to do with our neighborhood." I turned down the offer. The next morning, Robert called. Margaret's gallery had been set on fire overnight. "It was clearly arson," Officer Anderson explained at the scene. "I've already requested camera footage from the area." Margaret was devastated, but determined. "I'm not giving up now, Michael. This just proves we're hitting the mark." The security footage showed a hooded man planting an incendiary device. 2 days later, Officer Anderson identified him as a security guard they'd occasionally hired through the HOA. That evidence got added to our case, which now also contained charges of intimidation, and criminal damage. Finally, the day of the trial arrived. The courtroom was packed. Artists, residents, journalists, even people from other neighborhoods facing similar problems. David presented our case step by step, witness after witness, document after document. The narrative of a systematic scheme to displace legitimate property owners was built up right in front of us. Susan Miller stayed calm until Jennifer took the stand. Miss Miller personally instructed me to alter dates on official documents, Jennifer testified. I even saw her meeting with a Vista Horizon rep in her office, discussing commissions based on the number of properties cleared. That's when Susan started to get nervous, whispering frantically to her lawyers. The turning point came when David presented an email file, recovered from the HOA server by forensic experts. In this email, dated 3 months before the first notice to Mr. Thompson, Miss Miller writes to the CEO of Vista Horizon. The studio on the corner of Maple is going to be the toughest to acquire. The owner is a veteran, which might generate bad publicity. I suggest we speed up the process of expanding the HOA's jurisdiction to classify him under technical violations. A murmur ran through the courtroom. I saw Susan's face go pale. Your client deliberately planned the displacement of legitimate owners for her own benefit and that of the developer, David concluded, addressing the judge. This goes far beyond simple administrative violations. It's conspiracy and fraud. The trial lasted 5 days. In the end, the verdict was announced. The HOA was found guilty of abuse of power, document forgery, and systematic harassment. Susan Miller and 2 board members were criminally indicted. The association would be dissolved and reorganized under new, transparent rules. Financial compensation exceeded our expectations. Besides rebuilding my studio, everyone affected would receive reparations proportional to their losses. We left the courthouse to find a crowd celebrating. TV cameras, reporters, residents, all eager to hear about the victory. But all I could think about was rebuilding. The following week, while news of Susan's conviction still dominated the papers, we organized a community cleanup. Dozens of volunteers turned up to help clear the rubble from my studio. Among them, to my surprise, was Billy, the Navy veteran whose broken vase I had found. I heard you fought for all of us, he said, extending his hand. I came to give back. A local architect offered his services to redesign the studio, keeping its original style but adding new community spaces. An Iraq veteran contractor brought his team. Local artists took turns bringing food and drinks for the workers. In 3 months, the new studio was nearly finished, bigger, stronger, and more open to the community. The exterior walls became a collaborative canvas where local artists painted murals celebrating the neighborhood's diversity and resilience. During the rebuild, our story gained national attention. Communities all over the country facing similar situations reached out to us. David even started offering consultations for groups resisting forced displacement. What started as your personal battle has grown into a movement, Margaret observed during one of our weekly meetings, which we now held in an improvised community space. The impact went far beyond our case. Under public pressure, the city established new rules for homeowners associations and passed legislation to protect cultural and historical spaces. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to get access to more stories like this. Jennifer found a new purpose as a transparency coordinator in the new community association that replaced the HOA. Officer Anderson was promoted and set up a special program to monitor real estate irregularities. On the eve of the studio's reopening, I received a letter from the Department of Veterans Affairs. They wanted to launch a pilot art therapy program based on my studio's model to be replicated nationwide. On reopening day, hundreds of people turned out. I cut the red ribbon at the entrance, alongside Billy, Jennifer, Margaret, Robert, David, and Officer Anderson, all those who made the rebuilding possible. Inside the new studio, we set up a special exhibit featuring works saved from the demolition and new pieces created during our struggle. In the center was a collaborative sculpture made from fragments recovered from the rubble, including that blue ceramic piece I'd carried with me all this time. This isn't just the story of a rebuilt studio, I told everyone gathered. It's about rebuilding a community. It's about remembering that the spaces where we create, heal, and come together are sacred and worth fighting for. As people explored the new space, I looked out the window toward the neighborhood we had almost lost. Antique shops, galleries, cafes, studios, all now protected by new laws and, more importantly, by a community that learned its own strength. A young veteran I'd never seen before came up hesitantly, looking around. I heard this place helps people like us, he said, that we can leave some things behind here. Not leave them behind, I gently corrected as I handed him a brush. We transform, and we sure as hell don't do it alone. As I led him to a table with art supplies, I realized the circle was complete. The studio that saved me was now ready to save others, stronger than before, rooted not only in its rebuilt structure, but in the collective determination of a community that found its voice. The battle for the studio ended, but its legacy had only just begun. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to get access to more stories like this.